In this nugget, we'll be configuring print services. We'll take a look first of all at why we even want to use network printers, because certainly it's possible to provision printers for each individual user. You can imagine how impractical that would be in a large organization though. We'll also take a look at something here called the EasyPrint driver, which makes it sound as if it's going to make installing drivers easier or something like that. The reality is it has to do with terminal services, or what we call remote desktop. Also, we'll take a look at enterprise print management. That's kind of going to be a common thread throughout all of this, because we'll use the new console here to manage our printers, and it gives us a lot of different functionality in a centralized location. We'll take a look at how to deploy printers, which is much easier than it was in years past. It all revolves around policies, and you'll see how easy that is to manage. Also, we take a look here at printer pooling. This is a great way to make sure that you have high availability for your printers. So, for example, if one of your printers jams, users can still print their print jobs, and they'll have good availability that way, as well as adjusting the print priority. And that's to make sure that certain types of print jobs from certain users, for example, will get out ahead of other lower priority print jobs. All right, let's address here printers. This is the last nugget in this series, and I've kind of saved the most boring for last, quite honestly. Not because I think I'm a boring trainer, although maybe you would disagree. Mostly because nobody is really all that excited about printers. I mean, they kind of have a job. They're just a chore. We have to maintain them. We have to fill them with toner. We have to replace the printer rollers every now and then, and that's a big job in and of itself. They jam. They're frustrating. So I can't really think of any administrators I've talked to who've said, oh, I love printer management. But anyway, we will talk about them here. And one of the good things is Microsoft has made some strides to at least make the whole process less frustrating. Now, the first thing I want to really address, though, is why we want to use network printers. Now, this might not seem like something I would have to address for experienced administrators. However, I have seen individual printers attached to people's separate computers in many organizations. I went to a large insurance company where I thought they would know better, and I did some consulting there. A lot of people had their own printers when they really didn't need to. Another place I went to was a large property management company that manages some of the largest shopping malls in the United States. And in their office, just about every user had their own inkjet printer attached to their own computer. I think they're mostly USB printers, and it was really a very inefficient way of working. So let's talk about why you'd want to centralize all of that instead, and that's obviously you can get centralized management with the network printer. Because with this, an administrator can manage the print queues, he or she can manage all of the drivers, all of these things that I say here, except for the physical administration. Yes, sometimes you still have to visit the printer and unplug it or reset it, or replace the toner cartridge, something like that. But otherwise, you can replace the drivers or update the drivers from a central location instead of having to visit each user's separate computer. Whereas if you have all the printers attached directly to each user, well, you've got to go visit each machine and update those printer drivers. That's a really big chore, and it does not scale out to a large deployment. Also, you can just install the printers and their drivers to all your various clients using easy methods. Most often you're going to use group policy preferences or policies, and you can do it all from your own cubicle. You really don't even have to walk over to everybody else's machine and do anything. It just does it. It's on its own once you've configured the proper policy or preference. And then there's also queue management. Sometimes a printer will jam and there's a bunch of jobs in there, and you might need to redirect them, or you might need to just take that printer offline, and you might need to rearrange the queue or cancel certain print jobs. Sometimes someone will print something with strange codes in it or something, and it'll just lock up that print queue and nobody else can print behind it. Well, you might need to right click on that offending print job and just print cancel or select cancel. So the other thing, obviously, is there's much more cost-effective. I mean, when you compare having a printer for each user to this down here, I guess I should have reordered this, to a single high-volume printer. And by the way, a lot of these they're like waist-high. They look a lot more like a copy machine than a printer, and a lot of them will duplicate the rolls. Now, you can print, copy, fax. You can make it a copy machine. You can print directly to it. So really, it's mostly the same technology for laser printing anyway. So anyway, these a lot of times are very expensive, and they might be thousands and thousands of dollars. And in terms of trying to budget that or get a budget passed to get that kind of a printer approved, you really have to sell that on management sometimes. But when you add up the fact that most of those will have built-in maintenance contracts with them so that you don't have to have unknown costs in the future for replacing parts that might break or replacing the rollers or doing anything else like that. And a lot of them will also even include a temporary replacement if it's a big major job. So you don't have to be without printing while a repair is going on. Well, a lot of those things really add up, especially also when you compare it to situations like I was in with that property management company where each person had their own inkjet printer. Inkjet per page is substantially more expensive than laser. And that's even comparing it to a consumer laser printer. When you compare it to these kind of high volume ones, where you get more bang for your buck out of those for sure. So also, there's just fewer physical devices to maintain, comparing to each user as well. And that takes a lot of soft costs out of things when you use a single larger printer that somebody else maintains. Because otherwise, you're running around to all of them. You're making sure that everybody's got the ink that they need. You're going around making sure that jams are all cleared. I know users are supposed to do that, but usually they'll call you anyway. It's just a big hassle. If I'm going to clear jams, I'd rather do it on one printer than on several dozen. Alright, now on the exam objectives, one of the things that it calls for is knowledge of the EasyPrint driver. So let's go ahead and address what that relates to. It's really only a function of remote desktop services, or also known as terminal services, on your server. We haven't really discussed that a lot, but what you can often do is you can configure a server like this right here as a terminal server or remote desktop server. This means that clients, for example, in this case, a user from the Tucson office, will be able to connect to this server, and then they'll be able to get a complete desktop from the server. So all the applications, all the configuration, everything is done on this particular server, and they can be connecting from a very low-powered or even an older PC. They just have to have the client software to make the connection. But all their desktop experience, their applications, everything they're doing is from a session that's delivered over this server right here. Now, the problem is, when you make this connection, everything is just fine and we're going about our daily work, but now we need to print a job out. Well, since my actual desktop is coming from the Phoenix office, then this desktop is really going to be attached to this printer that they have configured for that server. So when I print a print job out, I don't want it printing out in Phoenix. I want it printing out next to me somewhere or nearby. So what the EasyPrint driver does is it makes sure that you're redirected so that you don't use this as the default printer. You can use it if you manually select it. But by default, it will instead choose a local printer that's attached to your computer, maybe a USB cable, or something that's in a print server. So it might be a print server down here that you print to instead that's connected to that printer. And that would be a shared printer there. So that's really pretty easy. That's pretty much all there is to the EasyPrint driver, and that's what its function is. Now for the remainder of what we're doing, I'm just going to show you here that I've already gone to the Add Roles and Features item, and I've added in a print server under Print and Document Services here. And once I've done that, that exposes this print management console to us, which we can then use. So let's go ahead and address what we've got here and what our advantages are with this. First of all, I can go to any print servers that I have, and then I can go to any installed printers that it has. Now these two printers, I think there they go. These two printers are always installed by default. We don't actually directly use them. This is just something that's similar to creating a PDF file. In fact, even for Adobe software, when you save a file as a PDF, well, what it really does is it sends it to a PDF printer and then saves it. So it's kind of a fake printer that generates that PDF. Same with this XPS. I don't have a fax machine installed, but I could if I had the capability for it here. But it still gives us a fax option. But otherwise, in order to install a printer, what I'll do with this console is I'll right-click here to choose Add Printer. By the way, as long as we're here, you may notice these are all conventional things you've always seen, but you can also see this Show Extended View, which will just show you any print jobs that are going on there, kind of a handy feature. And then if it has a printer web page, a lot of these new devices nowadays actually have a management interface, so you can go to their web page. This one obviously would not, but otherwise, you can add that in here as well if you want. But I'm going to go to Add Printer, and then I don't actually have a printer that I can use here. I have some printers that don't have the appropriate drivers for 2012 yet. They just haven't been updated. So I'm just going to kind of fake it and pretend to install a printer. But let me show you something that's kind of cool here. First of all, if I go search for network printers, it's going to detect the printers that I have here that don't have the drivers yet that I can show you. But this is really very handy, and provided the drivers are available, it's something I really like a lot. Look, it automatically picked up both of the printers I have. This one's kind of a small office printer that does print, scan, fax, all the conventional stuff that you'd need. And then this one's a large photo printer that I have as well. But I don't have drivers for those, so I'm going to go ahead and do something else. And I'll just show you through all of the steps here. I could add a TCP or web services printer by IP address or host name. Here I would enter in its host name if it's got an entry in DNS. Otherwise, I'll just enter in an IP address. This would be my Canon printer that you saw in the previous list. And then it can auto-detect the printer driver to use. Maybe I just have bad luck, but it seems like this rarely ever picks up the right driver or any driver. And usually it just says it can't find one, and then I have to manually chase it down on the internet and then install the printer driver, and then we go from that direction. But otherwise, might as well try it and see if it'll work. I know it won't work in this case anyway, so I'm just going to deselect it. And at that point, you could then choose to install a driver, or if it found a driver, you could use one of those there. Also, some printers will actually have kind of a universal driver. HP has made a lot of progress in that themselves, so they may have a driver already installed there that would work for that device, and you would just have to know that from the manufacturer. So then if you did, you would select that option and click Next. I would have to choose a manual installation, and then I would just go down to wherever my printer was, and then they don't have that installed here or available here, so I would just have to add the printer driver. In this case, by clicking on Have Disk, to where I have already downloaded and extracted the driver. And then your drivers are going to have an INF file that accompany them that provides instructions on how to install that driver. So you would point it to the INF file, and then you'd be on your way. For my case, since I have to select something else anyway, since I don't have print drivers, I'm just going to pretend that my Canon is actually an HP. I'm going to try to find something that looks really expensive here. How about I don't even know what that is, but let's choose that thing. It ends in Z, so it must be the very most recent model. You can't get any more recent than Z, right? So we'll just choose that one. I don't even know what it does. It probably so powerful it has a nuclear centrifuge in it or something like that. Anyway, so I've gone to this office jet thing here. Wait a minute, an office jet? Oh, well. Anyway, so I'll go ahead and click that, and then I'll click Next, and then we'll just go ahead and let it do its thing. Anyway, that's not as fancy a printer as I thought it was, because if it's an office jet, it just uses ink, so that's not so fancy. But it doesn't really matter. For our purpose, I'm just going to click on Next, and then we'll just go ahead and let the installation conclude. I could print a test page, but that'll create a mess. Who knows? If you have a printer driver mismatch, and it's not the right driver for that hardware, it could do who knows what. It might just not print at all, it might lock up the print queue, or it could print out gobbledygook. And it could go on indefinitely. It could go through reams of paper trying to print the job out, so I'm certainly not going to do that. And then I'm just going to click on Finish. But now I've got this Office Jet printer. Anyway, I'm a little embarrassed that I installed that printer. It probably doesn't have a nuclear centrifuge powering. It's probably a little gerbil in there just running around. Anyway, but I need to go ahead and install it again. In order to magnify my own embarrassment, I'm going to do the same thing over again. Now, why am I going to do this? The reason being, I'm going to have to use a second printer here in order to demonstrate some of the other things we'll be working with, including print pooling and print priorities. So I'm just going to continue on through the wizard here, and when I'm done, we'll revisit and we'll see we have an additional printer of the same kind installed. Alright, so now that I've got that printer installed, I do want to show you one other thing that's not part of the exam objectives, but certainly is very handy for branch offices, and that's the ability to enable branch office direct printing. This is a new feature in 2012. What does this actually do? Well, let me just get a blank piece of paper out here. Let's say that again, I've got my Phoenix office here, and this is my print server. And when we install our printers on the print server, then the print server will send the print jobs to the physical printers. It just so happens that one of the physical printers that it's responsible for is over here in the Tucson office. Okay, and here's my printer, and it spits out print jobs. Well, when I'm sitting at my desktop here, okay, my old IBM PC right here, and I send a print job, what has to happen is, since it's really sending it to this print server over here, it has to go across the WAN link to the print server, okay, and then when the print server gets all the information that it needs to, and it handles the print driver and all of that, then it will send the job physically back across the WAN link to this physical printer, and then I see the print job happen. Well, this is a real big problem if I've got a slow WAN link, 128K WAN link, or if it's slow or unreliable, and especially if I print large print jobs, it might take a long time for that job to get back over to the printer. Well, what happens now is the clients can then cache information about the print job here, about the printer and its configuration on the server. And instead of going through this whole round trip, it could even print directly to the printer if there was a WAN link problem and if the WAN link was down. That's kind of a shortcut explanation of that whole thing, but that branch office printing thing is a really pretty nice feature now. Now, another thing that's not specifically mentioned in the exam objectives is how to deploy these printers to all of my clients. You see, I might have dozens or hundreds of clients that all want to use this printer, but it's not practical for me to go to the control panel of each one of those machines and install this shared printer, because you can do that. Since it's shared by default, and if we right-click on this and go to its properties, we can confirm that. Okay, we can see here that under sharing, yep, it is shared. Well, the thing is, I would have to go to each individual client and find this printer through the printer wizard, and then I'd be able to use it. I can't really do that on all my desktops. It just doesn't really scale out. Also, look at this. We can list this in the directory, which means that we can do an Active Directory search for that printer as well. In fact, I'm going to do that for both of these just real quick while I'm thinking about it. Anyway, they would be searchable in Active Directory. Now, to actually install this automatically on my clients, what I need to do is to have it as a deployed printer down here, and that's done by right-clicking here and deploying with Group Policy. Now, this will use a Group Policy. You can also use a Group Policy preference to do this, although it's not included in the right-click that I just showed you there. But I would have to, first of all, choose a Group Policy name. I don't really have one that makes sense here, so I'm just going to create a new one, and I'll call this one Deploy Printer. Okay, and then we'll click OK. All right, and then I'll say I want to deploy this printer connection to the following: the computers that this GPO applies to, in other words, all the computers, or to the users. Normally, for this kind of thing, we would deploy it to computers so that anybody who logs onto a specific computer would be able to use the printer. However, sometimes we'll do it to user instead, so that some printers might be highly specialized. Like maybe I've got a 48-inch Epson printer that's very, very expensive, a $5,000 inkjet printer that prints out really nice photographs or something like that my graphics department uses. Well, I don't want general users to be printing out garage sale flyers and things like that on it. So I could then choose only specific users. But in this case, we'll just go with what we've got. Then I need to go ahead and add the printer, so I click on Add, and we see it right there, and then we click OK, and that's pretty much all it is. Now we see that it's successfully been deployed. Now you saw earlier in the wizard as well that I had selected the domain. If you hadn't seen it there, then we can go back and review this here. We can see that that printer is now deployed, but if I go to Group Policy Management, we can see that it linked it to the domain, but you can just choose wherever you want it to go in that wizard. You can say a specific organizational unit or something like that. In my case, if it's a small office and the entire domain is in a single building, not too big of a deal there, and we'd be okay with that. So here we see the domain, and there's my deploy printer item. If you want to see specifically where that's located, then you can go into the policy itself, and we can double-click that to open it up. Then we can go down into this in Windows settings, and then you see here deployed printers, and there's our printer item. Now you can also do this manually through here. You could right click here and choose deploy printer and pick out another printer, but that's just another way of doing it, and it's very simple and easy to do in that printer console. All right, now here you can see that I've got that printer installed on a Windows 8 computer. Now I did never actually install this manually. It installed because of the Group Policy object that we configured. So when I started this computer up, read the policy, installed the printer and its drivers. Now also, you might just see, wow, there's a lot of printers here. Where's all that coming from? Well, you might not always see that. The reason why we're seeing those in this case is just a little bit unusual. That's because I'm making a remote desktop connection to this client. And I'm doing so through my Windows 7 computer, which has all of these printers installed. And anything that says redirected is actually on the host machine from which I'm making this remote desktop connection. If I were to log on locally to the Windows 8 computer, you wouldn't see any of these redirected devices. You know what? In fact, I'm just going to go ahead and do that so you can see for clarity's sake what I'm talking about. Alright, so here I've just gone to my Hyper-V machine, and I've double-clicked to directly connect to the virtual machine connection of my Windows 8 computer, and you can see now here, yeah, substantially fewer printers, again, because I'm not doing so through remote desktop, where it inherits the printers of the source machine. Now, of course, if I wanted to make this a default printer, very simple to do. All I do is right-click and set as the default printer, and now we can see that's the case. All right, now then here I've just added a couple of other printers. These are laser jets. Hopefully these are a little bit more high octane. Anyway, it doesn't really matter, but I added one here, and then I added a second one here, and they're both going to be available to my users because they're shared printers. However, there's something here called the priority that you can adjust. For example, maybe in a specific OU, maybe the people that work my front counter that actually interfaces with my customers and that prints out invoices that they want to give to our customers, maybe we want them to be able to have top priority over that printer. Now, what's actually going on here is both of these printers are the same physical printer. In the interface here, it looks like two separate printers, like they'd be two separate boxes on the countertop. In reality, they're both going to the same port, and it's the same physical printer. However, I will share this printer right here, and I can even just rename this. I'll call this, front desk. Something like that. I could give them a higher priority than anybody who's using this as the shared printer. So the back office, I distribute this, and I maybe right-click here and deploy it with group policy to the back office organizational unit. And then this one I would right-click and deploy it to the front office organizational unit or front desk. And then what I can do with this is go to its properties and go to the advanced tab, and notice the priority here is a 1. That's the highest priority you can get. The lower the number, the higher the priority, and you can't go into negatives. So then I would go to this one for the front office and go to advanced. And with this one, I would say, well, this one has a priority, and it's somewhat arbitrary. I could just set 2, it'd be fine. And then what would happen next as I click OK here is when people from both departments print to that printer, that one physical printer, the one with the higher priority, the front desk here, will get its jobs queued up first. Now, another thing I might want to do with this is to adjust permissions to make sure that people from the back office don't hijack the front desk printer object and then get their print jobs to the front of the queue in front of my customers. So what I could do with this is to go to the front desk, and I could go to its properties, and then you can see here that it's already shared, but I want to go to the security tab so that not just everyone can print. So first of all, I'm going to remove that item, and then I'm just going to click on add, and I'm going to say only the front, can't remember what I called it, front desk security group is able to print to this printer. Because you see, by default, everyone can print to any shared printer. So if you don't want that behavior, you have to go up there and remove everyone like you saw me just do, and then make sure that the people you do want to print are included there. Notice also there's kind of special groups. Anybody that installs the printer already has full control over it here. And then any other default groups, such as administrators, server operators, or print operators, all have full control over the printer. This means that they can print, they can manage the printer, meaning that they can do things such as update drivers or change the settings, default settings of a printer. They can also manage documents, which means that they can cancel not only their own print jobs, but also other people's print jobs that are in the queue. But regardless, now the way that this is set, only front desk people will be able to use this printer. Then having taken care of that, let's go down here to these printers as well. Now, these are actually physical printers on different IP addresses. So they're two separate physical devices. I could do something else here, though, called printer pooling. And in order to work with that, let me show you what I can do. First of all, I'm actually going to delete this printer. Yeah. Even though it actually connects to a physical printer, I can actually use a single print object here in Print Management and go to its properties. And I can go to the Ports tab, and I can choose to enable printer pooling. And now I can use the same printer driver to print to two separate printers. Now, what's the advantage of this? This will allow my users to have a single printer that they can see and that they can access, so that when they print their jobs, it goes to this right here. And then there are two physical printers in the print room. So when they print their job in a round-robin fashion, it'll go to one or the other printer. Now, they won't know which printer it goes to. They'll just have to kind of look through the print jobs when they get to the print room to see where their job is. Now, given all of that, what's the advantage of even doing this? Well, first of all, administratively, we only have a single printer to manage here, instead of 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 down through here that we would have to manage separately and update for. It does have a single driver. This would not work for an HP OfficeJet here, and then for a Canon printer, and then for some Samsung printer, all of that. It has to be the exact same printer in a printer pool. And then we only have to worry about installing this single printer object to all of my users that are going to use a printer in that print room. And the real advantage is going to be performance, because let's say I've got 4 printers in that print room and I'm going to be using printer pooling for all of them. Well, I can set up, a quarter of the office on one printer, a quarter of the office on another one, and so on until I've gotten all of the printers allocated. But there's really no way to tell who's going to be doing the most printing at any given time. It might be that a certain chunk of that office, maybe they've got their whole print queue all stacked up and people are waiting 10 minutes before their jobs print out, and the other printers are just sitting there idle. Well, when you use printer pooling, it does so in a round-robin fashion, so it just sends the next print job to whichever one is least busy, and it makes it much, much more equal, or fair to distribute the print jobs that way. Now let's take a look at the remaining nodes here, because we see a few other things we should really address. One of those is just the drivers. There's really not a whole lot, cool stuff here. You could just remove a driver package if you no longer need it. A lot of times when you uninstall a printer or you delete the printer, the drivers might still be left behind, so you might want to get rid of that. And then there's also the properties themselves. This, again, not really anything to configure here. This just gives you information. Might be useful if you need to find out the exact name of a specific file within the printer driver. So there's that. There's also forms. This is very useful because we might want to customize our forms, or maybe we have a specific form that has new letterhead on it and we need to adjust it or something like that. So what we can do here is to right-click here to choose Manage Forms, and then you can see here that on this one I could go to this and I can see what the dimensions are and so on. And if that's not really going to suit my needs, what I could do is to create a new form based on this, and then say, hey, you know what, this is fine, but our margins at the top are bigger than that. We have a company letterhead, so we need a 1-inch margin up at the top. We could do something like that, and that would work out just fine. Of course, we then want to also rename this to, letterhead or something like that. Okay, so that's the other thing that you have available for you in this interface. And then finally, let's take a look at some of these other nodes here. For example, ports. You see all the default ports that we have right through here, the comma and the LPT in the file and so on. And then there's the terminal services items, which would not be there if I hadn't installed terminal services here as well. And those certainly make printing available through terminal services. And then there's the IP ports that were installed with the printers that I specified earlier. So certainly all of these are available. You can right-click here to choose to add an additional port if you want to, like in another TCP/IP port if you want to, for example. Not really, again, a whole lot, wonderful there. You can manage the various ports by, again, adding or deleting ports in this interface as well. Otherwise, not a whole lot to that one. But the forms, you can manage the forms. All of the forms that we see here, this is the various sizes for envelopes and sheets of paper and whatnot. These are going to be available to any of the users that install the printer. Okay, so once I have set up all of these are all the default ones. I haven't touched these at all. But I can go into Manage Forms, and I can set up my own if I want to. So I can create a new form. Maybe our company letterhead is the same dimensions as this, except that we also have a 1-inch margin at the top for our company letterhead, for example. So we could then click OK here, and then we would have a new form here. And, of course, you might want to name the form something different there as well. And then drivers as well. There's not really a whole lot here. We can see the drivers that are already installed, and if we needed to, we could get rid of some of these. So we could say that we wanted to remove the driver package, okay, and we could choose that option there. If it's in use by any current print jobs, then it won't let you. So you have to make sure that you have taken the printer offline and the print queue is cleared first. Otherwise, it will not allow you to do that. You can also go to the properties of this, and you can see the individual file names. Again, not really a whole lot interesting there. And then you could do another thing here. This is kind of confusing. You could remove the driver package, as I mentioned earlier, and then you can choose Delete. What's the difference? Well, the driver package includes any of the accompanying files along with the driver, the INF files or any of those other kinds of things, whereas the delete item will just delete the actual driver itself. Oh, you know what else? I want to also point something else out here. Let me, I don't think I have any current ones here. Let me just crack one of these open real quick here. I guess I'll have to right-click on this and go to Properties. Oh, yeah, actually I do, because these were installed from the Windows driver store. But notice how it says here, Type 4. What this means is it's using the version 4 printer driver. This is new with Windows 8 and Server 2012. Gives you a few different advantages. For example, you may recall that in previous versions of Windows for servers, we would have to install both a 64-bit driver and a 32-bit driver. Well, now, even though it says x64 because I'm on an x64 server, you don't have to do that separately for each architecture anymore. Now, a single driver will handle it all. Also, a lot of these drivers now under version 4 will support multiple printers, whereas before we usually had to be pretty specific about getting the exact right printer driver with a specific printer, with some of the exceptions of some of the HP printer drivers were universal. And finally, also, another advantage of the version 4 drivers is that you don't have to manage the printer driver store centrally, particularly when there's an update. What happens is the clients will then download that updated driver directly from Windows Update or WSUS, which is Windows Server Update Services. So just a few more cool features now here about the version 4 printer drivers. In this nugget, we talked about configuring print services. We took a look, first of all, at why we'd even want network printers. Obviously, for practical reasons, you just can't have one attached to each desktop. Plus, it's very expensive, even though the printers themselves for enterprises are very large and expensive. We also took a look at the EasyPrint driver. Remember, that has nothing to do with actually installing or using the driver directly. It's really relating to remote desktop, so that even though the client might process the job locally, it still has to communicate with the print server, maybe in a hub office from a branch office. And this gets to be a little bit of a burden in terms of the WAN traffic and WAN availability. We also took a look at enterprise print management. The big key here is the print management console is so improved, and it's got really a centralized location where you should be able to do just about any print management maintenance you need to, except for physical maintenance like replacing a toner or something like that. That's going to come out in the next version of print management. It's going to do it for you, folks. Just kidding. Don't take me literally on that one. Anyway, we talked about deploying printers. This can be done through Group Policy Object, and it's very easy to do in the interface. You can even create the group policy itself in the UI under print management. We took a look at printer pooling, which is a great way to make sure that your printers are always available, so that in the print room, if one of them's jammed or out of toner or has some other error going on with it, well, when your users print to a printer in that print room, it'll bypass that one, especially if it will communicate with the print server, and most of them do these days. And it'll go otherwise to one that's either less congested or one that is not broken. It also will take a look at, or we did take a look at, printer priority. And remember, this is a great way to make sure that certain print jobs print out ahead of others that are lower priority. Well, I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.